How much food do you think your family has right now? Not what you bought last weekend. Not what you remember seeing the last time you opened the pantry. How much food is actually inside your home today? It's a surprisingly simple question. Yet most people answer it with remarkable confidence. A couple of weeks, maybe a month. We've got plenty. But confidence isn't the same thing as certainty. Because very few people have ever stopped to count. Not the boxes, not the cans, not the frozen meals, not the ingredients hiding in the back of a cabinet. They simply assume everything will add up when it's needed. And that's where reality often begins to look very different. A full refrigerator can create the feeling of security. A packed freezer can make you believe you're well prepared. Shelves filled with groceries seem reassuring every time you walk past them. But appearances can be surprisingly misleading. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and discovering that every grocery store in your area is closed. Not for a few hours. Not because it's a holiday, but because deliveries have stopped. No fresh food arrives. No shelves are restocked. No quick trip to buy what you forgot yesterday. Suddenly, your kitchen becomes everything you have. Not next week, not someday, right now. At first, it doesn't seem like a serious problem. After all, most homes look like they contain plenty of food. Until one simple question changes everything. How many complete meals are actually sitting inside your house? Not snacks. Not random ingredients. Not food that requires items you don't have. Complete meals. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. Day after day. Most families have never looked at their pantry that way. Because we don't usually shop with emergencies in mind. We shop for convenience. For this week's dinners. For tomorrow's lunch. For ingredients we'll eventually use. But if grocery stores suddenly disappeared from the equation, would your kitchen still provide what you think it could? The answer surprises far more people than you might expect. And understanding why begins with taking a closer look at something almost every family believes they already know: their own food supply. Walk into almost any kitchen and you'll find the same reassuring sights. A refrigerator that looks comfortably stocked. A freezer packed with frozen food collected over weeks or even months. Pantry shelves holding pasta, cereal, canned vegetables, rice, soup, snacks, and ingredients waiting for future recipes. At first glance it feels like plenty. And in everyday life it usually is, because under normal circumstances, food isn't meant to last indefinitely. Our kitchens are designed around one simple assumption. Whenever something runs low, we simply buy more. It's a habit so deeply built into modern life that most of us never notice it. Milk gets low. We stop by the grocery store. Bread runs out. We buy another loaf. Need ingredients for tonight's dinner? The supermarket is only a few minutes away. Without realizing it, we've outsourced our food storage to the supply chain itself. Our pantry isn't expected to hold months of meals. It's only expected to bridge the gap between shopping trips. That's why a kitchen that feels full today can begin looking very different after only a few days. Not because the food disappears, but because our eating habits remain exactly the same. Breakfast still arrives every morning. Lunch still needs to be prepared. Dinner still comes every evening. Children still ask for snacks. Coffee still gets poured. And every meal quietly removes another small piece from what seemed like an endless supply. Most families never notice this gradual change because new groceries constantly replace what's been consumed. The cycle feels invisible, until one day, the replacement stops. Now imagine opening your refrigerator with a different perspective. Forget how full it looks. Instead, ask a much simpler question. How many actual breakfasts are inside? How many complete lunches? How many dinners could you prepare without needing a single additional ingredient? The answers often become surprisingly difficult. A bottle of salad dressing isn't a meal. 3 jars of pickles aren't dinner. Half a bag of shredded cheese won't feed a family. Even ingredients that seem valuable may depend on something else you no longer have. Pasta without sauce. Rice without protein. Flour without yeast. Frozen vegetables without a reliable way to cook them if the power has also failed. Individually, every item seems useful. Together, they don't always become complete meals. And that's where many people discover the difference between owning food and owning a plan. Because preparedness isn't measured by how full your shelves appear. It's measured by how many ordinary days your family could continue eating comfortably using only what already exists inside your home. And for most people, that number is far smaller than they ever imagined. The first few days probably wouldn't feel very different. Breakfast would still be served. Coffee would still be brewing. The refrigerator would still contain familiar foods. Life would seem surprisingly normal. And that's exactly what makes the situation so deceptive. Because the biggest changes rarely happen all at once. They happen one meal at a time. One breakfast, one lunch, one dinner. Each one feels insignificant on its own. But together, they quietly transform a full kitchen into one that's becoming increasingly difficult to manage. The yogurt disappears. Fresh fruit begins to run out. Bread becomes the last loaf. The milk carton feels lighter every morning. Leftovers become tomorrow's lunch, and suddenly meals start looking different, not because there's no food, but because the variety begins to disappear. Most families don't eat from their pantry every day, they eat from their refrigerator. Fresh food usually comes first. The pantry is often the backup, the place where ingredients wait for future recipes. But when grocery stores are no longer part of the routine, that backup suddenly becomes the main source of every meal. That's when another realization begins to appear. A pantry filled with ingredients isn't necessarily a pantry filled with meals. A bag of rice can last a long time, so can dry pasta, canned beans, oats, flour. But meals require balance. They require combinations: protein, calories, nutrition, flavor. And sometimes the missing ingredient is the one you never thought about buying extra. A simple jar of cooking oil, salt, spices, coffee filters, even something as ordinary as peanut butter can suddenly become one of the most valuable items in the house. Not because it's expensive, but because it's practical. As the days continue, something interesting happens. People naturally begin changing the way they eat. Portions become a little smaller. Snacks become less frequent. Leftovers become more important. Meals become simpler. Not because someone tells them to, but because they instinctively realize that every decision affects tomorrow. This is where preparedness quietly shifts from storage to planning, because having food is only the beginning. Knowing how to use it wisely is what actually extends your supplies. Many families discover that they own enough food, but not enough organization. They know what's inside the refrigerator, but they have no idea what's hidden in the back of the pantry. Some items expire without anyone noticing. Others are forgotten for months, and valuable ingredients often remain untouched simply because no one remembers they're there. The real advantage isn't having the biggest pantry in the neighborhood. It's knowing exactly what you already have, because once uncertainty disappears, better decisions become surprisingly easy. And that's when a simple kitchen stops being just a place to prepare meals and becomes one of the most important resources your family already owns. At this point, many people assume the solution is simple. Buy more food, fill every empty shelf, stack boxes from floor to ceiling, turn the garage into a warehouse. But that's rarely where real preparedness begins. In fact, many families already have more food than they realize. What they often lack isn't storage, it's awareness. Imagine walking through your kitchen with a notebook instead of a shopping list, not looking for what needs to be bought, but discovering what already exists. How many cans of soup are hiding behind newer groceries? How many bags of rice are tucked away in different cabinets? How many forgotten boxes have been sitting on the top shelf for months? You might be surprised by what you find. Preparedness isn't always about adding more. Sometimes it's about finally seeing what's been there all along. A well-organized pantry does more than save space. It changes the way you think. Instead of asking, "What should we buy?" you begin asking, "What can we already make?" That small shift can completely change how long your food supply lasts. Because meals don't begin at the grocery store. They begin with understanding your own kitchen. Some families choose to rotate older items to the front. Others create simple meal plans using only ingredients already in the house. Some keep a written inventory. Others simply spend a few minutes every month checking expiration dates and replacing what they've used. None of these habits require expensive equipment. None require a larger home. And none require dramatic lifestyle changes. They're quiet habits, almost invisible. But over time, they create something far more valuable than a pantry full of food. They create confidence. Confidence that comes from knowledge, not guesswork. Because uncertainty is often what makes emergencies feel overwhelming. The less you know about your own supplies, the harder every decision becomes. But once you understand exactly what you have, how long it can last, and how those ingredients fit together, something changes. The kitchen stops feeling like a collection of random groceries. It becomes a carefully understood resource. And perhaps that's the biggest difference between simply owning food and truly being prepared. Not because your shelves are fuller than everyone else's, but because you already know the story they're telling. And once you know that story, planning for tomorrow becomes far less intimidating than most people imagine. Eventually, life returns to normal. The grocery stores reopen, delivery trucks arrive, fresh produce fills the shelves once again, shopping carts roll through the aisles, and for most people, the experience quickly fades into memory. The routine returns, the refrigerator gets refilled, the pantry slowly fills back up, everything looks normal again. But something has quietly changed, not the grocery store, not your kitchen. Because once you've stopped looking at food as a collection of groceries and started seeing it as a collection of meals, you never quite see your pantry the same way again. You begin noticing what runs out first, what what lasts longer than expected, what your family actually eats, and what simply sits untouched on the shelf. You realize that preparedness isn't about buying everything. It's about understanding what already belongs in your home. Most families don't need a larger pantry. They need a clearer picture of the one they already have. Preparedness doesn't begin during an emergency. It begins on an ordinary afternoon, opening a cabinet, checking a shelf, rotating a few cans, writing down what you actually have instead of what you think you have. Small habits, simple decisions, quiet preparation. Because confidence doesn't come from owning more, it comes from knowing more. If you'd like to explore some of the practical preparedness materials mentioned throughout this episode, you'll find them in the description below. They're simply everyday resources that many families choose to keep at home to stay organized and better prepared for unexpected situations. Take a look whenever it's convenient and decide what makes sense for your own household. If you enjoy practical documentaries about preparedness, self-reliance, and everyday resilience, consider subscribing. Each episode explores a simple question that most people never think to ask, until the answer suddenly matters. And speaking of simple questions, food usually isn't the first thing a family truly runs out of. Water is. Most homes contain far less drinkable water than people imagine. So before assuming you're prepared, ask yourself one more question. How much clean water does your family really have? That's exactly what we'll explore in our next episode. Because preparation rarely begins with dramatic decisions. It begins by understanding the ordinary things we rely on every single day.